Today I want to kick off with the big news of the last week, which is that the government has released, by way of Christian Porter, the Attorney General, the first draft of the long-awaited religious discrimination bill. Now, ACL's been there at every step of the process on this, trying to put input into the result and trying to get some good protections into that bill to make it a really worthwhile thing. We've been speaking with the drafters of the bill, with the Attorney General's office, and so on and so on. Finally, it's here. A first draft, which the Attorney General is inviting further comment on. And one of the things you might have noticed if you've been following this is that there's been somewhat divided opinion. Some people are in favour, some people are against. I think there's a reason for that divided opinion. And it is essentially this. The bill has some pretty incredible headline offerings. When you simply go through a shopping list of what the bill purports to give us, you think, wow, that's really, really good. But you know what, and no pun intended, given this is a religious discrimination bill, but the devil is in the detail. And we say that and we mean it, because when you look at the headline offering, which looks so great, and then you look at the detail of what the section actually says, you go, oh, it's like the bill gives, and then through the details and the exceptions that are provided, it takes away. So many times. Let me give you some examples. I'll go through firstly these great headline offerings, which are going to look fantastic. 5 of them. The first one is this. Well, the bill obviously establishes that we can't be discriminated against because of religion in a range of areas: accommodation, employment, professional accreditation, that kind of thing. That's the first thing. Great. Secondly, religious bodies, which doesn't just include churches, but the bill specifically says it includes faith-based charities and it includes faith-based educational institutions. Great. But religious bodies can act in accordance with their beliefs. They're free to do that. To do so is not discrimination. So you can think, for example, a faith-based school teaching the Bible, or having policies that uphold their beliefs about gender, so bathrooms and things like that. Or perhaps an educational institution or another entity that wants to hire people who share their faith. Good, it all looks great, excellent. Thirdly, employers cannot act against an employee because they have made what's called a statement of belief. So they've gone out there in their private life or said something and made a statement of belief, well, the employee can't act against them. You think, well, that protects Israel Folau, surely. Well, looks like it, doesn't it? Looks great. Fourthly, Section 17 of the Tasmanian Anti-Discrimination Act, which is the section, if you remember, that says that you can't do or say anything that might offend somebody. And so Archbishop Julian Porteous and others have been caught by this. So Julian Porteous put out a pastoral letter on the church's beliefs about marriage. It's a very gentle sort of a thing, but someone said, hey, guess what? I'm offended. Took him to the Anti-Discrimination Commission. This sort of thing's been going on down there a lot. Well, this act actually specifically names that section, and it says, do you know what? A statement of belief cannot be in contravention of that section. So you think, wow, it looks like it protects Julian Porteous. It looks like it protects others like Campbell Markham who have been caught by that. Looks good. And fifthly, the fifth major one I'll point out is there is actually a section in there that relates to health practitioners. And it says there that if they conscientiously object to providing a medical service, well, they're protected. So you think of a doctor who doesn't want to refer for an abortion or provide an abortion or something like that. 5 things, 5 key things among several that are there, but 5 key things that look good. Now let me do a little case study on how that when you get into the details, you find problems. Firstly, I said that you can't be discriminated against on the basis of religion in a whole range of areas. But there's a question. What's actually protected? So if I or another person of faith was to apply for a job, or was to apply for accommodation, or was to be accredited by a law society or some other body that gives accreditations, what is the thing that they cannot discriminate against me on the basis of? And the Act actually puts it this way. It says lawful religious activity. Now, there's 2 issues with this. One is with lawful, but it's a bit technical. I don't want to get into it. The thing that I'm concerned about is one not many people have actually mentioned, and it is that phrase religious activity. Now, you think about it. What do we want protection from? We actually want protection for engaging in activities that are consistent with our religion, not activities that are intrinsically religious. You think of a court answering that question. Is an Instagram post a religious activity? It's a social activity, it's a public activity, how many categories can you think of? But is it intrinsically religious? I think it's very much open to a court to say no, it's not, because courts already have distinguished, as we shall see, between religious and commercial activities, for example, as if your faith stops as soon as you open the cash register. Well, this is a very narrow protection. I can see that it would protect, going to church. It would protect singing praises to God in church, praying, things that are intrinsically, inherently, by their very core nature, religious. But what about those things that we do in public life that are consistent with our religious faith? Are they religious activities? The way court precedents have been going, maybe not. So actually, at the very core of the act, the thing which is defined as the religion that's protected, religious activity, well, I'm not sure that that's enough. I'm not sure that it cuts the mustard. So it fails there. Secondly, however, I mentioned that religious bodies are protected, including educational institutions, charities. They are allowed to engage in conduct that's consistent with their beliefs. But this section, it then says, yes, but not if that charity or whatever is primarily engaged in commercial activities. Well, hang on a second. So again, as I said before, the cash register opens and the faith stops, does it? What about a faith-based charity that's in the provision of childcare services at a heavily subsidised rate? Is that not commercial activity, charging fees for a service? Is there not any number of myriads of things that religious bodies do through healthcare provision and all sorts that may in fact involve charging of fees or selling of goods or some service, or even if they did that as a sideline to some other work that they were doing to try and raise money for it? At what point does commercial activity become a problem, and therefore that charity and that faith-based group, just because they're selling stuff, is no longer allowed to act consistent with their beliefs? That to me is a huge hole in the whole thing. Thirdly, I mentioned the Vilify clause that says, well, for a statement of belief, an employer cannot act against an employee. But it's ruined by what I call a Qantas clause, because it actually says in the exemptions to that, it says, but the employer can act against the employee if it's necessary to avoid unjustifiable financial hardship. Well, hang on a second. That's exactly what Rugby Australia claimed. That's exactly what they said. They said this is necessary to avoid unjust financial hardship. Our sponsors are going to pull out. Nobody wants to be associated with this. We have to act against him. Not only that, but it enables sponsors in that conduct, because they know that if they put the pressure on, then there's an excuse structure for Rugby Australia to make the decision. Or indeed, it enables boycotts. It enables Twitter storms against companies that are associated with different people, or for people to call politicians to come out and put pressure on from the LGBT side of the spectrum and things like that. And straight away, companies can go, well, look, this is going to cause financial hardship. We're going to lose service. It's going to ruin our reputation, and so they can take action against somebody for a mere statement of belief, and that's fine. The Act enables the Vilify case. It doesn't prevent it at all. Not only that, but under this statements of belief section, there's a limit. It says, well, actually, if a statement of belief could vilify or harass a person or group of persons, then it's not protected at all in any circumstances. The trouble is, the word vilify, I'm not sure where you find that defined in law. I don't find the word vilify in any other legislation. I found it in the act that existed temporarily to ensure a good environment for same-sex marriage debates, which was around for a few months during that debate. But that's fallen away now. It's no longer applicable. I haven't seen judicial consideration of this word in legislation. And these days, as we all know, people consider all sorts of things to be vilifying. All you need to do is disagree or say something that questions or doesn't affirm. And well, that could vilify, that could stir up hatred, this is the way they talk. And so there's a strange limitation there, which frankly is too low a bar. I mean, it sounds like a very serious thing, and all those who try and stand up against it will look bad, but actually in its legal application, it's very important that we point it out. So statements of belief, to what extent are they protected? Well, in the details, turns out not much. In fact, an employer can actually impose rules of conduct on their staff of any description, even if they limit statements of belief, even if they limit religious freedom, even if they discriminate on the basis of religion. It says here, so long as they are reasonable. Reasonable. We've done a lot of cases, including workplaces, where employees have said, well, it's been necessary for us to fire that person, or necessary for us to put in a rule that says absolutely no mention of faith at work, etc., because we want our employees to feel safe. Now, is that reasonable? Probably, yeah. Could be. So what good is this? Potentially none. Or you go on to the Porteous Clause that I mentioned, which is the one that targets that law in Tasmania and says, oh, well, a statement of belief doesn't breach that law. And so what it does is it says, well, just because someone could be offended by you doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you can't do it. You can do it. However, it just puts in that same old standard, vilify and harass. Again, we're not quite sure what that means. Again, it probably doesn't solve anything because of the uncertainty. Again, people can allege that and pursue an anti-discrimination complaint for the smallest of things. Or finally, I mentioned health practitioners, and I said, well, health practitioners, apparently, there's a section in there if they conscientiously object to providing a health service, but it very quickly goes into exemptions. And what does it say? Well, it says, if it would adversely affect the health of the patient, well, they can't do that. Well, who knows when it's an abortion, adversely affecting the health, it's not even health care. Also, it says, well, it doesn't override state laws. So there you go. You've got permission for Victoria to persist with its laws, Queensland to persist with its laws, New South Wales, if it gets its laws soon, persist with those. It's a toothless tiger. It does absolutely nothing. And also overall, there's nothing in this Act whatsoever that protects service providers if they want to conscientiously object to participating in same-sex weddings. And you remember that this whole process started a couple of years ago now when same-sex marriage was legislated. This is how we got here through a long process, and it seems like that's been completely forgotten. The bill gives and it takes away. It has great headline statements that look good, and in the details, it completely undermines what it claims to do. Now, I hope that this is not deceptive. I hope that it's merely drafting error. I think I'm being very generous in saying that. You get very skeptical in a job like this when you see the way politics works. But see, it looks that way. I trust it's not deceptive. It could even be in there, for example, to have people say, well, look, neither side's happy. The pro-same-sex marriage types are not happy, the LGBT communities are not that happy because they don't like religious freedom, and the Christians are not that happy because it doesn't go far enough. So it's probably a good act. It's not a good act because it gives and takes away. It's a whole lot of legal verbiage which achieves very little. I'd rather not have a whole lot of legal verbiage on the statute books for judges to wallow around in and do crazy things with. It needs to be clear. It needs to be clarified. Now, there's a consultation process which is opened up now. And that's where we're headed next. And we'll be there at the first round table. We'll be there speaking to the Attorney General later on as well. We trust that by highlighting these issues, the AG, the Attorney General, is on the side of freedom and he does something about it. Let me say briefly though, some people say, well, why religious freedom? Why pursue it? I've dealt with this extensively in previous episodes. But I want to say something which I've noticed lately, and that is that so often what we actually call religious freedom could really be called freedom for the truth. Because it is overwhelmingly today the truth tellers that are getting into trouble. And you think of those lightning rod issues that create these discrimination cases, that create these legal cases against people of faith. Usually there's something in those cases about what they've said or done or what the institution believes around transgenderism, for example, gender issues, around sexuality, around life. So often you see people trying to suppress the pro-life side of things. But who in those cases is getting targeted? It is nearly always those who tell the truth about these issues. Those who say that God made male and female. Those who say that transgenderism is not all that the activists crack it up to be. Those who say that actually a child is a human being worthy of protection, it's a sacred life. That's who faces the music. And it's always weaponization of law against truth. I used to think at one stage in my political development that freedom was what we were fighting for. I'm not so sure. We use the language of freedom, but actually we live in a time when we are fighting for the truth. And we are fighting for the truth to be free. And the Apostle Paul says, pray for your governments. Why? Well, firstly, for religious freedom, that the godly life would be a life of peace. And secondly, because God desires all people everywhere to come to a knowledge of the truth. And insofar as the government passes laws or activists use laws to shut down avenues to a knowledge of the truth, Christian institutions not able to promote the truth, Christian individuals not able to speak the truth, and so on and so forth, insofar as that's going on in a society, it's a bad thing. Rather, God's will is that the truth would be enabled to be proclaimed at all times to as many people as possible, that many may come to its knowledge and be blessed by it. And as Christians, that's our mandate, to witness to the truth of the gospel in word and deed all the time. And so if you're a Christian and you're not interested in religious freedom, you need to be, because it goes to the very heart of what Christians are called to do in this world.